The desert heat shimmered off the concrete as a row of jets screamed overhead, leaving behind a trail of noise and dust. Soldiers leaned against supply crates, laughing too loudly, their uniforms crisp, their confidence loud. In the middle of it all, a woman with no rank patch and no audience stepped quietly to the edge of the gunnery range. Nobody paid attention at first. She was just the tech girl with the clipboard always around, but never really there. Someone whistled low and said they were about to witness a new kind of entertainment, the kind where a nobody tries to play soldier and fails in front of everyone. Rachel Carter didn't flinch. She handed off her clipboard without a word, pulled on a headset, and walked toward the ready line while chuckles echoed behind her. The drill was meant to test timing, precision, coordination under pressure. To them, it was a joke, a break from routine. To her, it was something else entirely. Within seconds of starting, the smirks started to fade. She didn't run, didn't shout, didn't fumble like they expected. Her movements were calm, surgical. Every call-out was timed to the second, every strike landed perfectly. The laughter had stopped before she reached the halfway mark. By the end, the range was silent except for the beep of her last confirmed target hit. One trainee lowered his phone, stunned, and muttered something under his breath. Rachel stepped off the course the same way she had stepped on, quiet and unseen. But nothing would be the same after that. Rachel Carter had always moved through life quietly. She was the kind of woman who folded her laundry while the coffee brewed, who showed up 10 minutes early and left without drawing attention. At 34, her canvas sneakers were worn, her ponytail practical, and her shirt sleeves usually rolled up not for style, but for work. She never minded the silence that followed her into a room. In fact, she preferred it. Noise, she believed, was often a cover for uncertainty. She was steady in how she spoke, how she walked, how she listened more than she talked. Her job title didn't come with glory or a call sign. It came with data, charts, readings, error margins. Rachel had studied systems engineering because numbers made sense when people didn't. In college, while others networked and climbed, she dug into flight telemetry and engine heat signatures. Her final project predicted sensor drift under sustained heat loads, and her professor said it was too detailed for undergraduate work. It didn't lead to a scholarship, but it gave her certainty. She liked knowing how things really worked. She'd applied to 3 military research labs after graduation. 2 never called her back. The third invited her to assist on a weapons calibration team, then reassigned her to a support position after just 3 weeks. They said her insights were interesting but not actionable. The lead technician once told her she was a thinker, not a doer. She nodded, then went back to work. By the time she arrived at Range 12, she already knew her role. Not to lead, not to shine, just to make sure nothing broke. She checked equipment that others ignored and stayed long after drills ended to verify sensor logs. She saw patterns others missed because she looked closer, stayed longer, and didn't care who got the credit. Most days her headset crackled with static while the pilots shouted over each other. She recorded their runs, filed reports, and watched, always watching. She saw how Derek Morrison took corners too fast and how Marcus preferred to blame system errors instead of pilot mistakes. She noticed that Target Panel 7 had a half-second delay and that no one adjusted for wind shear past Sector C. But Rachel never said much, not because she was afraid, but because she knew when no one was listening it was better to keep gathering facts. Her way of fighting wasn't with confrontation, it was with precision. When something didn't line up, she didn't raise her voice. She ran the numbers again. There had been moments in her past when she thought about quitting. Once when her calibration notes were overwritten by a junior officer who forgot to save the originals. She sat in the back of her car for 30 minutes, hands shaking before driving home. But the next day she showed up early, rebuilt the logs from scratch, and never mentioned what had happened. Rachel didn't have allies, not in the traditional sense. She had printers that worked because she fixed them, drones that flew smoother because she adjusted their base code on her own time, and reports that never got her recognition but kept others safe. She wasn't flashy, but she was necessary. She had no medals, no commendations, no office with her name on it. What she did have was a memory like a hard drive and a habit of noticing every small thing that didn't belong. Her co-workers joked she was probably part machine. Rachel smiled when they said that. Machines Don't panic. Machines don't overlook. Machines just keep working. So did she. In a world built around performance and image, Rachel Carter was the invisible glue. She made sure what needed to happen happened. She never asked for thanks. Only accuracy, only integrity. And that quiet force buried under routine and disregard was about to change everything. Range 12 stretched across a sun-bleached section of the Nevada desert, where heat rose in waves and the air smelled faintly of scorched rubber and jet fuel. Here, rank was worn louder than any uniform, and presence was measured by voice volume swagger and how many people looked when you entered the room. Pilots shouted to be heard over the noise of their own ego radios crackled with banter, and even the way someone walked seemed choreographed for an audience. Drills weren't just drills. They were performances. Each run down the gunnery lane was done with exaggerated movements, a kind of theater in Kevlar. Trainees threw themselves into cover roles they didn't need, called out targets in deep, radio-trained voices that barely masked the showmanship. When someone messed up, it became a joke by the time they hit the lockers. When someone excelled, it was a story repeated until it sounded like legend. Rachel Carter didn't fit here. She moved in the background like an afterthought, clipboard in hand, headphones over one ear, logging every detail. While others flexed in front of mirrors or swapped war stories in the shade she was in, the shadows double-checking telemetry and making notes with a dull pencil no one borrowed. Her boots were dusty, her sleeves rolled up, and her expression unreadable. No one asked for her opinion unless something broke. And even then the tone was more annoyed than appreciative. She didn't talk unless necessary, which made some uncomfortable. In a place where volume meant dominance, her silence felt like rebellion. Not loud enough to challenge, but just strange enough to be noticed if only to be dismissed. The range itself was unforgiving. Targets sprang up from gravel, half hidden under camouflage netting. Simulated fire drills blasted through earpieces, and scorched tire marks lined the obstacle lanes like warnings. But where others rushed, Rachel stood still. She analyzed the wind, the timing, the pattern of how each section cycled through its traps. She could see every inch of that range in her mind. Panel 5 with its half-second delay. Sector D's occasional false readings under direct sunlight. The heat-warped targets at the southern end that needed recalibration but hadn't been flagged in over 3 months. The others didn't see those things. They saw challenge. She saw system failure waiting to happen. Her presence felt wrong to some of them, like a reminder that not everything here was about adrenaline and image, like someone was watching too closely, taking notes when no one asked her to. It wasn't hate. It was worse. It was disregard dressed as camaraderie. Rachel knew the feeling too well. At range 12, nobody said the quiet part out loud, but it was there. Real pilots looked a certain way, talked a certain way, had patches and inside jokes and stories from the field. Rachel didn't belong in those stories. She just made sure they got told right, or at least tried to. Every time a pilot jogged past her half smiling or not looking at all, the message was clear. Stay in your lane. Don't make noise. Keep the system running. But Rachel Carter wasn't interested in keeping broken systems running. She was watching for when they broke completely. And that moment, she could feel, was getting closer. It started like most things did at range 12. Loud voices, sharp laughs, and a setup disguised as casual banter. Derek Morrison leaned against the mission board with that smirk he wore like a uniform. His voice was just loud enough to make sure everyone heard him ask Rachel if she was going to keep time again, or finally do something useful. She didn't answer. That only made it worse. Marcus, the lead instructor, stepped in with that forced grin he saved for moments when he wanted to embarrass someone under the banner of fairness. He offered her a shot at the lane. Fair chance, he called it. Rachel understood what it really was. Entertainment. They weren't offering her respect. They were setting the stage for her to fail. The group around them buzzed with quiet anticipation. Phones slipped from pockets, elbows nudged. This wasn't a test. It was a show. And Rachel was the act they'd been waiting for. She handed off her clipboard. Her fingers steady. Nobody noticed the way she scanned the range like a chess player reading the board. For months, she had watched every run, every misstep, every shortcut these pilots took. She had memorized the timing of the target pop-ups, the wind shifts across each sector, the mechanical quirks of the faulty thermal panels near the southern quadrant. This wasn't new to her. She had just never had the clearance to act on it. The first steps she took onto the course were met with laughter. One of the younger pilots muttered something about her probably getting stuck on the first marker. Another said someone should time how long it took her just to line up a shot. No one knew she already had. Rachel didn't run. She didn't shout commands. Her voice in the headset was calm. She called out coordinates without the dramatics. When she moved with intention. When she stopped, she didn't hesitate. She observed, corrected for wind drift, and struck with flawless precision. Halfway through, the tone around the observation post shifted. Someone murmured that she looked like she was teaching a master class, but Derek was quick to cut in. He mocked her pace, her posture, her quiet. He made a joke about soil samples and yoga instructors. A few laughed, but it sounded forced. Rachel kept going. Her hands adjusted each sequence with the certainty of someone who wasn't improvising. At the final stretch, the one designed to trip up even the experienced flyers, she did something none of them had ever done. She waited, watched, calculated. Then she took the shot. One clean strike. Confirmed hit. When she walked off the course, there was no celebration, no applause. Marcus gave a neutral nod and said she passed. Derek started clapping slow and sarcastically, calling it the quietest performance in gunnery history. A few of the trainees mimicked her movements in exaggerated pantomime, whispering fake commands into their fists like children playing soldier. Rachel didn't respond. She took back her clipboard, flipped to the score sheet, and marked every hit. The data was perfect, the execution flawless, but nobody cared. They were already preparing for the next run, already shouting again, already pretending she had never stepped up. Later, she returned to her usual post, alone. The only acknowledgement came from a tech who asked, half curious, if she'd been the one who ran lane 48 with that odd silent pass. She said yes. He nodded, gave her a thumbs up, and walked away. That night, as the officers laughed in the club and Derek spun another story about slow-motion gunnery, Rachel sat alone in the archives. The glow from the screens lit her face as she watched the footage back frame by frame. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just studied the data again. It should have been a victory. It should have been a turning point. But it wasn't. It was a reminder that in places like range 12, being right didn't matter if you weren't loud. Being excellent didn't matter if no one was watching. And being better didn't matter if people had already decided you weren't supposed to be. But Rachel didn't need them to see it. Not yet. She had seen it for herself. And that was enough. For now. The archive room was always cold. Not because of the air conditioning, which barely worked, but because it was buried deep beneath the operations wing where sunlight never reached. Rachel liked it down there. No interruptions, no jokes, no raised voices. Just screens files and the soft whir of a fan that buzzed slightly off balance. Most nights long after the drills ended and the chatter died out, she stayed behind to process telemetry. It was part of her job, but not the way she did it. Others skimmed. She reviewed every sequence twice. She noticed odd spikes in target activation times and flagged inconsistencies no one else bothered to question. One night, while checking routine calibrations from range 12 southern lanes, she paused. Something in the thermal panel timings felt wrong. The targets were registering late by fractions of a second, but the difference was consistent. Not random, not user error. Something mechanical. She ran the sequence again. Same delay. Then she pulled the previous week's data. Still there. Over and over, panel by panel, she started to see the pattern. Every target in the southern zone activated 0.3 seconds late. It didn't seem like much, but in high-speed runs, where decisions were made in milliseconds, it was enough to throw off a shot. Enough to cause panic. Enough to cause a crash. Rachel logged the anomaly, created a heat map overlay, and compared it against pilot scoring. The miss rates were highest in the misaligned zone. Several marginal hits had been ruled acceptable. The instructors called them close calls. Rachel saw them for what they were. Errors hidden by generous judgment. Her stomach sank. She triple-checked the sensor logs, then searched back through maintenance requests. There were complaints. Vague, scattered, marked as resolved or ignored. She found references to thermal drift telemetry variants and panel resets, but nothing had been fixed. The entries were closed without detailed notes. She knew what this meant. Pilots weren't just underperforming, they were being trained to adapt to broken systems. That wasn't flexibility. That was negligence dressed as toughness. Rachel leaned back in her chair, heart thudding. This wasn't just numbers anymore. It was a warning. The next day, she brought her findings to Marcus. She came early printouts in hand diagrams, highlighted language clear and respectful. She laid it out like a checklist: issue, impact, solution. She expected resistance, maybe some skepticism. What she got was dismissal wrapped in contempt. Marcus didn't even sit up. He flipped through the first few pages, then set them aside like junk mail. His tone was flat, almost bored. Not your job to worry about calibrations. Let ops handle systems. Your telemetry stick to timing. Rachel tried again, pointing to the logs showing the drift, explaining the safety risk. He interrupted, said she was wasting his time, said maybe she should focus more on doing what she was told and less on pretending to be an engineer. The words landed hard, not because they surprised her, but because they confirmed what she'd feared. He didn't care. She left his office holding the same report she came in with. Only now, it felt heavier. Back in the archive room, she sat at her desk without turning on the monitor. The air felt colder than usual. She wasn't sure if it was defeat or something deeper. It wasn't just that Marcus had refused to act. It was that he made it clear she didn't matter. For a moment, she doubted herself. Maybe she had overanalyzed. Maybe she was wrong. But when she reopened the files, the data stared back like truth carved in stone. She was right. The range was broken. The pilots were being misled. And someone had to do something. Rachel copied every file onto a personal drive. She started logging her own reports, ones that wouldn't be deleted or buried. She cataloged timestamps, matched pilot names to incident locations, and compiled graphs that no one had asked for. She didn't know what she'd do with them yet. But she knew one thing. She couldn't stay silent. The isolation grew sharper. Others avoided her in the hall. Conversations paused when she entered the break room. Someone had spread the word. The quiet girl with the clipboard was making waves, trying to act above her role, trying to stir things up. Rachel didn't fight back. She didn't defend herself. She just worked. The hours got longer, the silences deeper, but she kept showing up. She had always been the quiet one. Now she was the quiet one with proof. And sooner or later, someone would have to listen. The sky was clear the morning it happened. Too clear, Rachel thought, watching from the observation booth as the rookie lined up for his first full run. His name was Rodriguez. Fresh out of flight school, sharp posture, eager face, the kind of pilot who still believed the system worked the way it was supposed to. She had seen him around but never spoken to him. He didn't travel with the louder packs, and he hadn't joined in mocking her the day of her silent run. That made him stand out more than he knew. As he stepped into the lane, Rachel leaned forward slightly. His path would take him through the southern sector, the one with the drift. Her stomach tightened. Rodriguez moved smoothly at first. His rhythm was clean decisions fast, but as he crossed into the miscalibrated zone, she saw it. A half-second hesitation. His targeting system flashed one reading, then another. His timing staggered. His angle tilted. He overcorrected hard and dipped low, nearly clipping a ridgeline at dangerous speed. She held her breath until he leveled off, barely clearing the last target with a banking move that came too close for comfort. His voice came over the comms, tight, confused, trailing off as if trying to decide whether to admit he almost lost control. The range went quiet after that. Even the instructors didn't say much. Marcus called it a good save. Said pressure builds good pilots. But Rachel could hear something else in Rodriguez's voice. Doubt. The kind that doesn't go away with one pep talk. Later, near the supply tent, she found him sitting alone, still holding his helmet, like he wasn't sure if he'd earned the right to wear it. She sat down slowly, unsure if he'd even acknowledge her. After a moment, he looked up and asked what had happened out there, why his instruments didn't match the targets, why it felt off. Rachel hesitated. Then she told him the truth. The southern panels were misaligned, the thermal activation delayed, the telemetry skewed. She had tracked the data for weeks, tried to report it, been ignored. His run had been compromised before he even stepped onto the course. Rodriguez listened without interrupting. When she finished, he didn't call her paranoid or dramatic. He didn't roll his eyes like others had. He simply said that would explain everything, then sat in silence for a long time. It was the first time someone had believed her, not because she'd forced them to, but because the truth had finally touched someone directly. The fear in Rodriguez's face wasn't just about the near miss. It was the sudden understanding that he had been trained to trust a broken system. That night they met again in the archive room. Rodriguez didn't say much, just watched as Rachel pulled up the logs from his run, showed him the variance in timing, the dip in temperature response from panel 17, the delay in activation across the zone. He asked how long this had been happening. She said at least 6 months, maybe more. He shook his head, whispered something under his breath, and started scanning the other flight records on the screen. Rachel didn't stop him. She just opened another folder, added his name to the access list, and kept going. For the first time, she wasn't alone. They worked for hours, comparing pilot runs, marking anomalies, cross-referencing complaints that had been buried in vague maintenance notes. The pattern grew clearer with every file. The issue wasn't just with one section. It was bigger, deeper. Rodriguez's presence gave it all weight. He wasn't just a witness. He was living proof that this wasn't theoretical. In the quiet hum of that data room, something shifted. Rachel still felt the fear, the pressure, the isolation. But now she also felt something else, a kind of calm strength. Someone had seen what she saw. Someone had felt it in the cockpit. And that changed everything. She didn't know what they would do next, not yet. But whatever it was, she wouldn't have to face it alone. Not anymore. Rachel knew the unofficial channels had failed her. She had brought the data to Marcus and been shut down. This time she went higher. She filed a formal quality assurance request under the telemetry coordinator's jurisdiction. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was smart. Rodriguez helped draft the language, technical, precise, rooted in protocol. Together they cited calibration discrepancies and rising anomaly rates. They didn't accuse. They documented. The report went to Central Ops Review with a copy flagged to the Safety Oversight Unit. It was hard to ignore a data-backed report with exact timestamps and pilot testimony. Marcus caught wind of the submission within hours. He stormed into the telemetry office the next morning, calm only in appearance. Rachel sat at her desk staring straight ahead as he questioned her professionalism, her motives, even her mental fitness. He called her a distraction, claimed she was undermining confidence in the program, that she was acting outside her authority. She didn't argue. Instead, she slid a copy of the same report across the table. Alongside it were maintenance logs from 3 ranges' email threads and 2 technical memos signed by a senior engineer. The evidence was layered, solid, and time-stamped. Marcus scanned the pages and pushed them back with a sneer. Still, he couldn't tear them up. Not this time. That afternoon, Derek held court in the officers' lounge, spinning Rachel's report into gossip. He said she was trying to make others look bad, that she was bitter over being left out of flight school, that she had it out for Marcus. But the room didn't laugh like it used to. A few nodded, sure. But more looked uneasy. Rodriguez had already started quietly sharing his story. He didn't make a scene. He just explained what happened to him during that run. The sudden delay, the system confusion, the moment he thought he'd crashed. He didn't name Rachel. He didn't have to. He talked about system integrity, about training pilots on faulty data. That landed harder than blame ever could. Soon, pilots started whispering, asking questions. Someone brought up a time their HUD went fuzzy near the south zone. Someone else remembered the strike that didn't register and thought it was a glitch. The scattered doubts began connecting. Rachel and Rodriguez had facts. The others had memories. It started to add up. The pressure built fast. Maintenance staff who had been brushing off inconsistencies now revisited their notes. One of them found a recurring issue with thermal sensors that had never been fixed. Another pulled an archived repair ticket from a year ago. Rachel's quiet file stack had become a web. And the center of that web wasn't her. It was the truth. Marcus tried to pivot. He ordered new diagnostics. sent out memos about equipment integrity, and reassured his team that Range 12 was fully compliant. But the words felt hollow, especially when people realized the diagnostics didn't address the real issues. They were cosmetic, a cover. Rachel didn't gloat. She stayed behind the scenes, updating logs, sorting data, helping Rodriguez build a cross-reference of incidents across multiple bases. The story was no longer about one woman being overlooked. It was about a pattern, a culture, one that preferred silence over correction. By the end of the week, Rachel's report had made it to Colonel Patricia Stone, the wing's safety officer. She was already reviewing increased incident rates across training facilities. Rachel's submission landed on her desk at the perfect time. It wasn't a complaint. It was a roadmap. The shift was subtle but real. People still looked at Rachel with hesitation, but there was no more laughing when she entered the room. Pilots nodded instead of looking away. Technicians asked to double-check things with her. Even Derek, once full of sarcasm, stopped short when he passed her in the hall. The weight had started to tilt. And Marcus felt it too. For the first time, he wasn't sure who controlled the story anymore. Rachel didn't need to fight for attention. She had the facts, and they were finally loud enough to be heard. The conference room felt more like a courtroom. The air was still thick with tension, and the blinds were drawn tight against the desert glare. Rachel sat alone at one end of the long table, a neat stack of folders beside her. Across from her sat Marcus. His jaw set, his dress uniform stiff with false confidence. Derek flanked him, arms folded, already glaring across the room like this was a joke he wasn't enjoying. Colonel Stone presided over the hearing. Her voice was calm, but clipped the kind that didn't allow excuses. She opened the floor for Rachel to present her findings. Rachel stood slowly, eyes level, hands steady, as she plugged in her drive and brought up the first slide. No greetings, no preamble, just the data. She walked them through the miscalibration logs first, showed the consistent delays in thermal panel activation, then layered in the pilot scoring graphs and incident logs. The pattern was clear. Errors had spiked in direct relation to the faulty systems. Her tone didn't waver. Her confidence came not from performance, but from proof. Marcus tried to interrupt halfway through. He said the data was being twisted, that it was out of context, that it didn't account for real-world variables. Colonel Stone held up a hand and told him to wait. Rachel continued. She showed how the maintenance records had been closed prematurely, how complaints had been marked resolved without action. She even included time-stamped audio clips from technicians who had reported the problems. Then came Rodriguez. He stood at the back of the room, requested to speak, and stepped forward when allowed. His voice was measured. He spoke about his near miss, about how his systems had failed him, about how Rachel had warned him when no one else would. He looked straight at Marcus when he said the delay could have killed him. The room was silent after that. Not even the stenographer's fingers moved. Derek shifted in his chair. Colonel Stone asked if he had anything to add. He tried to downplay the findings, said the equipment sometimes fluctuated, said real pilots learned to adapt. Rodriguez turned and looked right at him, said there's a difference between training to adapt and learning to survive broken systems, and no one disagreed. Rachel ended her presentation with a comparison chart. Before and after, pilot success rates, incident rates, diagnostic integrity scores. The difference was stark. She stepped back and let the numbers speak. Colonel Stone thanked her, then turned to Marcus, asked if he wanted to respond. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked around the room. No nods, no support. Even the people who had once dismissed Rachel now sat frozen. He tried again, said she had gone beyond her scope, that she was trying to elevate herself by causing trouble. Colonel Stone asked if he was suggesting Rachel had fabricated data, manipulated technicians, and coordinated false testimony. The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus went pale. Said no, that's not what he meant. Then what did you mean? The colonel asked. But there was no answer. The silence felt final. Colonel Stone looked back at Rachel and nodded once, then announced her decision. Marcus was relieved of duty effective immediately. Derek would remain on active flight status but was to be removed from all leadership roles pending further review. Rachel was recommended for immediate promotion to Range Operations Analyst with full authority to conduct safety reviews across the region. It was not a gesture. It was a correction. As the room emptied, several pilots approached Rachel. Quiet thanks. Nods of respect. No applause, just recognition. For the first time, her voice had weight. Her presence had meaning. Not because she demanded it, because she had earned it. Later that night, alone in the telemetry office, Rachel stared at the empty chair across from hers. The air felt different. Not lighter. Just real. She had spoken the truth, held the line, and for the first time, the system had listened. That was the victory. Not the title, not the promotion. The moment when the facts finally mattered more than the noise. 6 months later, Range 12 looked like a different place. The targeting systems had been recalibrated, the telemetry data aligned perfectly with manufacturer standards, and the drills ran smoother than they ever had. But the real difference wasn't just in the numbers. It was in the way people moved, the way they listened, the way they glanced toward Rachel Carter with something they'd never shown before. Respect. She had been promoted to Range Operations Analyst, a title that came with more than just an office and a door with her name on it. It came with responsibility. She now reviewed every safety report across the region, not because she wanted power, but because she had proven she wouldn't ignore the truth. The changes she pushed for uncovered similar calibration issues at other training sites. Her report became the backbone of a larger reform effort that spread far beyond Nevada. Marcus had been reassigned to a logistics center in North Dakota. His name rarely came up anymore. Derek still flew, but the swagger was gone. He kept his distance quieter, less certain. Most of the others had adjusted. They accepted the new reality. Some even thanked her. Not directly, but in small ways. A shared nod, a request for input, a seat left open in the meeting room. Rodriguez, now one of the most reliable voices in the pilot corps, became her quiet ally. They never spoke much about what happened. They didn't have to. Their trust was earned in silence and near misses in facts no one wanted to face. Together they watched a new generation of pilots train with the right tools and better systems. Rachel saw the stats improve across the board, but more than that, she saw fear replaced with confidence. That was the real win. One afternoon, she walked the length of Range 12 alone. The wind was softer than she remembered. The panels in the southern sector activated on time, clean and sharp. She paused at the same spot where Rodriguez had nearly gone down, and for the first time, she smiled. Not because she had proved them wrong, but because others wouldn't have to go through what she did. As she returned to the control tent, she passed the mission board. Her name was printed at the top of the Range Operations roster. A quiet reminder that even in places where volume once ruled precision could still lead. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't demanded. She just kept doing the work until it could no longer be ignored. Rachel never wanted recognition. She wanted things to be right. And in the end, that's what made her unforgettable. Not the speed, not the style, the accuracy, the integrity, the patience to stand still while the world rushed by, waiting for the moment that truly mattered. If this story moved, you don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Where you come from doesn't define how far you can go. Sometimes the quietest voice carries the deepest truth.